Well, good morning, WellHouse Church. Pastor Cullen here, excited to be back with you for another week of storytelling through the book of Acts. And today I want to talk about objectification. This is not a fun topic, but it's quite pertinent to the story that we find ourselves in this morning in Acts. Objectification is quite a big thing for Jesus. A lot of the times that Jesus has dialogue with anyone, it's humanizing people. Objectification dehumanizes someone. It turns an individual into a commodity. It turns them into a profit and loss number. It turns them into a monetary contributor. This is true in lots of ways, even today. It just so happens that I watched an Instagram video today of some Alabama prisoners going on labor strike because, number one, they're not paid. 5 states in all of the U.S. allow non-paid prison labor. Alabama happens to be one of them. This is not what spawned the strike, though. What spawned the strike was their living conditions. Just the sheer disgust of them. Simply not even having clean bathrooms. Not having proper medical care, which you see how that gets very cyclical. And so they've gone on labor strike. And what I've realized is, right, wrong, or indifferent, money makes the world go round. And objectification of people can be about many things, right? Jesus speaks about the objectification of a person in the form of lust in his Sermon on the Mount. But that's not the only way you can objectify someone. You can objectify someone for any value that they have and dehumanize them to the point that that is their only value, and you have objectification. Objectification is wrong. Objectification is what I think is sin. It's doing harm to the image of God. And unfortunately, we objectify people probably more than we don't in American society today. And this is a problem. And the reason I bring this up is because our story today, I want to tell it from the perspective of a centurion. He's been a side character throughout the story of Paul's journey sailing to Rome to see the emperor, which is what he's been doing up to this point. And our story today is actually about Paul's shipwreck. And you're going to get a lot of details about that shipwreck and what this text means in tomorrow's episode of A Closer Look. And you will also hear me say in that episode that there's not much, if you're looking for good like preacher material, there's not much there. But this centurion and his story as it has developed is worth a look. And so the story that we have is Paul has been held in Roman custody on some trumped up charges by the Jews, and the Romans know it. And so they're holding him for his own protection, and Paul is playing this political pawn game that he's found himself in between the Jews and the Roman Empire. And he's asked to go to Rome. And when he goes to Rome, there's a ship. It's not a large ship, but it's not a small ship either. It houses 276 people, of which I estimate more than 250 are prisoners of some kind, or passengers with prisoners. Of those other people, there is a centurion, the leader of the military element of transporting the prisoners. There's also a ship pilot and the owner of the ship, and there's some other people around. But the centurion is the one that is really one of the big decision makers, and probably the most decision maker, because the empire is paying for the ship to transport the prisoners. And Paul is one of these prisoners. And at one point, when they get on the ship, the centurion knows what's going on with this guy, right? And so he begins to watch Paul. And he sees Paul be who Paul is. Paul is a communicator, and he talks, and he encourages people, and he prays with people. And then there comes this moment where they have to make a decision about whether or not they're going to set sail out of the port to continue the journey, or if they're going to stay through the winter. Paul says, hey, I don't think we should do this. If we stay through, if we go, we're going to be at great risk and possibly for our lives. And the centurion is the one that ultimately makes the decision. He ignores Paul and has a conversation with the ship owner and the pilot of the ship. And they decide to go ahead and make the trek because they made a business decision. They made an economical decision. They objectified humans for the purpose of money. Now, they go on this journey and they get caught in this storm. For 14 days, they're in this storm. Haven't seen the sun or the stars in many days, the text tells us. And once again, a centurion is watching Paul pray and encourage and feed people and do lots of great things. And I'm sure, the text doesn't tell us this, but I'm sure Paul also did those things to the soldiers and to the centurion. And so there comes a moment right before things are about to get real hairy. And right before things are about to get real hairy, Paul goes up to the centurion because the centurion is about to take a boat, a smaller boat, and start off-letting people and seeing how they can fare. And Paul goes to him and says, if you do that, I cannot ensure their safety. God has given Paul this promise in a vision that his life will be spared, and so anyone connected to the ship will be spared. But if you put him in this boat, I can't promise that. And the centurion listens to Paul. They cut the ropes away, and they all stay on the ship. That's a big moment in the story. Now we get to the shipwreck. And the beginning of our text today is verse 39, and it tells a very detailed account of how the ship wrecks. It's quite boring, actually. But it tells how the shipwreck happens. And then it says this. Verse 42. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners so that none might swim away and escape. You have the objectification of a people. These are prisoners for a myriad of different reasons that they're on this boat. Paul, for one, is on this boat simply because he believes in the resurrection of Jesus, and the Jews don't like that. That is not worthy of death. There are lots of prisoners just like this, lots of them Roman citizens who have a right to go to the emperor, and the soldiers' gut reaction in a moment of crisis is to kill them because of objectification. Because they are prisoners, and this is what we should do. And up until this point, the centurion has been one of two, right? In the beginning he objectified, and then in the middle he did not. And now we ask ourselves, what will he do? Verse 43. But the centurion, wishing to save Paul, kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and make for the land, and the rest to follow, some on planks and others on pieces of the ship. And so it was that all were brought safely to land. The centurion wanted to save Paul. Not a prisoner, not a man, Paul, a human, an individual human who has value. The centurion was no longer looking at a category of people called prisoners. He was looking at individual humans, specifically one of them who happened to be named Paul, and the character of the story that we're following. And I think there's a beautiful metaphor when the text ends and says, and all were brought safely to land. Because people feel safe when they feel human, when they feel cared for, when they feel valued. People don't feel safe when they're objectified, or they're treated as a number or a commodity that's an inanimate object that is without emotions or feelings or needs or wants or desires. Unfortunately, for a lot of years, I think the church has objectified people and looked at people as numbers. That can't be a place. WellHouse cannot be a place where that happens. We cannot objectify people. We must value people as very real humans with very real needs and emotions. And so WellHouse Church, that's my question for you today, is how do we care for humans? How do we personalize people? How do we care for individual humans that we have very real relationships with? How do we ensure that WellHouse is not a place where someone is an objectified number, but they're a valued